write about residential, but I had to learn a lot about land law in order to be able to cover that market. So that's how I became involved with this particular issue, even though you think of me as somebody with expertise probably in pensions.
Ah, well,
Okay,
it's
got it.
lovely to have you on. It's lovely to have you on.
So I did property, wrote about property. And one of the things that became very obvious to me while I was doing that job was the unusual balance of land law in Britain that gave extraordinary powers to landowners to be able to extract value. And I really only thought about it in connection with commercial real estate. And it's only been within the past 10 or 15 years that it started to show up in residential as well.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
you're in charge of boredom and obfuscation. It's basically your job. Norma?
Sorry?
You're in charge of boredom and obfuscation.
Oh, is that right? Okay. Well, I'm very
Well,
good.
by your own admission. Well
there's-
done, Harry.
Well done, Harry. Great to see you.
Sorry about that. We always
That's
get this
all
sort of last minute panic where the microphone or the video doesn't work, but we're here.
That's
Yep.
fine. That's fine.
It's good.
Yeah,
We've had three panics. One, you didn't have a link. Two, Steve was on an echo. And three, you couldn't get shown. So obviously we're now set fair because we've got all our gremlins out of the way before we've even started. Let's get a very quick sort of ground rules on this. Is that Steve's in charge of making sure that everyone comes in and goes out and does the top and tailing. I will ask some questions as we go along, unless you are so full of it that you don't want any questions. No? Okay, and we will record this session, unless you're against doing that. Yeah?
No,
Okay.
no.
I'll just make sure I don't libel the PLSA, so I think we'll be all right. Fingers crossed.
Oh well, okay, that's fine. Or any other organisation, including the Freeholders Association.
No, absolutely no way.
We don't want any writs whatsoever. As we know.
Okay.
Good morning. Good morning, Brian. Morning, Harry. Morning, Henry.
Morning.
Morning,
Morning.
Peter. Morning, Peter. Thanks for joining. Apologies for the slight delay this morning. We've had one or two technical issues with cameras and echoes, but there we go. I think we sorted that out. Welcome to this next event, which is the coffee morning, and delighted to have Norma and Harry on board, and this is going to be hosted by Henry. So welcome everybody. We are recording, so thumbs up, Brian, Harry, Norma, everybody's happy that we're being recorded. And we will, in the usual fashion, allow Henry to ask the questions. If you want to make a point or ask a question of Norma or Harry, then please raise a hand. We will also open the chat. And so without any further ado, Henry, I'll monitor the lobby and over to you.
Yeah, well, thanks very much, Steve. We haven't got our usual compliments this morning, I'm afraid. I'm not quite sure why that is, but I'm going to make sure that this is as good a session as ever and that we get it properly broadcast to the wider population via the video. It's really great to have two giants on this subject on one call. Norma and Harry sort of span the journalistic prism. Harry is a newcomer and Norma is a veteran. And Norma tells me that she was the property, am I right in saying this, Norma? You were the property correspondent for the FT?
Yes, I was. It was commercial real estate that I did, but it required a gaining an understanding of the law that governed commercial property.
And Harry, you're the new kid on the block, the Harry Styles on the block. Are you able to explain just how you managed to get to your current position of prominence in this debate?
Yeah, so I worked at a leaseholder charity that runs the all-party parliamentary group on leasehold and commonhold reform, trained under a guy that spent, I think, 12 years as a Mail on Sunday property editor and learned journalism that way. And then obviously I set up this campaign group because I felt we needed to do something a bit fresh and a bit more dynamic to get the message through, because I think leasehold traditionally is a very dry issue. So we had to shake it up. There's a really quite charismatic young housing campaigner called Quajo on social housing, and his videos were going viral big time with videos. So I just thought, well, we need to ape that model, and we did, and we're getting, views of, for leasehold, not bad, up to 150,000 views, and these videos are being shared widely across Whitehall and Westminster, and we managed to get the bill into the King's Speech on leasehold reform, which was a huge coup because everyone was telling us in government it's not going to happen. Rishi Sunak isn't fussed. So we've got to where we've got to, but there's a long way to go still.
Okay, well, let's start at the beginning of this and ask ourselves, why have we got, and this may be one for Norma to kick off with, why have we got this strange and anomalous system whereby we have freeholders and leaseholders and often they're at each other's throats?
It really is a function of history, Henry. That is because from medieval times, the king was able to give land grants to nobles who found his favor. And in order for the nobles to be able to extract monetary value from the land that they were granted, they needed to rent it out to users. And this created a system when Britain was largely an agricultural and rural economy. And these leaseholders were often serfs who grew crops or raised cattle and were able to earn an income by the sale of those crops or cattle and pay the freeholder, the landowner, an annual ground rent. And somehow, the political influence, the political power of landowners for centuries was very, very strong. Until 1868, for example, you could not vote in this country unless you owned land. And even then, after 1868, it was very, very modest. We didn't get full suffrage, universal suffrage, until 1928. And the land interests have been very influential in making sure that the legal structure defends their property. And what you were able to see was that this freehold leasehold system was somehow translated into, as Britain became increasingly urban and industrialized, into urban areas. It really picked up probably after the great financial crash of 2008-9, when interest rates were very low and people could see that you needed to have some asset classes that offered something higher than what was available on UK government gilts and other interest rates.
That's fascinating. So actually the recent problems we were having with regard to the exploitation of leaseholders, relatively recent thing, would you say?
Well, there was a real explosion of construction of residential towers from around 2010 onward. And if you look at the data on the English Housing Survey, for example, they show that something like 40% of all flats have been built since around, I wish I had the numbers in front of me, but around 2012. So you've just had a big rush of construction for obvious reasons. Britain has become increasingly urbanized. If you look at the 2011 census versus 2001, you can see rising concentration in urban areas, and the 2021 census shows that even greater. So the demand for residential property in urban areas is rising at the same time.
So I was having dinner with my son, who lives as a leaseholder in a little flat in Yukon Road down in southwest London. And he was explaining, and so were his co-tenants, the problems they had with leaseholds. And these, I'm sure, resonate with you, Harry. This is not just a problem about leaseholders who actually own their leasehold. It's about tenants in general, I think. Do you want to sort of like expand on that?
Definitely. I mean, I think Norma made a really good point about it goes back to the landlord and the fact is, all these years later, after universal suffrage, we've got second-class citizens in our own society. And the fact is, it doesn't matter if you're a leaseholder or whether you're a rental tenant. The fact is that if you live in a block of flats, you have no civil control over its management, obviously over its charges. And there's a few journalists, I want to shout out to Sonia Sodder, the Observer, that have spotted that if we don't deal with the leasehold scandal, the rental crisis will only get worse, because when service charges increase, guess what else goes up? Your rent. So the fact is, there are really complex interdependencies there where, the fact is, the buy-to-let landlord under the law is just a tenant. He can't really do anything about those rising service charges imposed on him by another landlord, the freeholder. And also, beyond the monetary aspect of this, if a building is being run into the ground and you're not having a hot shower in the morning, you can complain to your landlord or the lettings agent. They can't do anything about it, because ultimately there's a bigger landlord at play here, someone who might be based in Monaco, Cayman Islands, BVI, you name it. And you've really got very few remedies to sort it out. So I think that's a big issue. And we've got the second lowest proportion of flats in our housing stock of any country in Europe. Obviously, we bequeathed leasehold to Ireland. So Ireland's got the lowest proportion in Europe. They hated being tenants, subjugated by mighty landlords. So we need to move away from leasehold quite decisively if we want to build up in our cities. Everyone's talking about London being a 24-hour city, but we're talking about Manchester, Leeds, Birmingham too, where they're wanting to build up in the cities. But no one is really going to want to live in these buildings that they can't control, and they're just glorified renters. I think for my generation, any of my cohort, I'm 29, you're going to be living under landlords of the private rent sector for quite a while left. Why would we then trade that in for being another form of tenant under an altogether far more powerful landlord? Because let's be honest here, if you have a well-functioning rental market, you can leave a bad landlord behind with your capital intact. The problem with leasehold, you sink your life savings into a tenancy that basically you can't control the value of, because it's someone else making decisions over that investment. And that's why I think we'll come on to that later, that we're all a bit disturbed by what the trade body is putting out there for pension funds. They're clinging to this system, which really is just rent seeking. It's nothing capitalistic about it. No one's sharing risk. No one is transferring value. They're only taking value away from leaseholders under the threat of them losing their homes under forfeiture. So it's a very barbaric system. And I cannot believe that, we talk about ESG, and I'm sure we'll come on to that. This cannot be compliant with that at all.
Well, Harry, thanks for that overview. You've answered about all the questions I had in one statement, but I'm going to have to come back to those. But one thing I would make as a real point, and this was something that was raised in the discussion I had on this last night, young men in their mid-20s saying, how can we actually plan for anything if we don't know the costs of our housing from month to month, year to year? There's such improbability about or impossibility of budgeting that these guys are saying that we just can't do things like make personal contributions to pensions and all that stuff because we just don't know what's around the corner. So fundamental problem for young people, and I think from older people like myself and Norma, a different set of problems, but no less real, which is that we may actually own these leases, but they may be of diminishing value because we just can't resell them at full value because of the impact of fluctuating charges on any leaseholder agreement. Okay, fascinating to
One
see.
quick thing that on the financial side, it's really important. Hamptons last year came out of data saying service charges have increased 50% in 5 years, and that England's flat leaseholders were paying last year alone £7.6 billion in service charges. That's £7.6 billion that could have been setting up a business, getting involved in the productive economy, starting a family, or as you said, putting money away for the rainy day for your retirement. So it's a huge opportunity cost there, money that's being taken out of the real economy. That's a huge thing, and I think it's great. Thanks for having us on today, because it should be of interest to anyone that's interested in pensions and policy making that way as well.
Thank you. Now, Norma, yes.
I just want to make a point that I think you would have gotten it from reading between the lines. When you buy a leasehold, you are not buying property. All you are buying is the right to occupy a specific space for a limited period of time, subject to fees and charges, terms and conditions. It's very important to understand this. When estate agents advertise leaseholds, flats for sale, you think you're buying property. And in fact, my husband and I, when our daughter was born many years ago, had a leasehold. We did not understand at the time that we didn't own where we lived. It was only when we went to sell the property that I realized all the ways that we could have been done over. Now, our freeholder treated us very fairly, and we didn't have a problem, but it became obvious that we were nothing more than glorified tenants. And I think how to address this has to go beyond simply, well, first of all, it must be addressed in Parliament, in the legal structure, but also we need to make sure that estate agents do not advertise things like flats for sale. They're not for sale. Occupancy of a flat is what is for sale. And conveyancing solicitors need to explain to potential buyers exactly what it is they're signing on to, and they don't.
How is it that we persist with this arcane feudal system when other countries have moved away from it? I'm thinking of Scotland, and many countries never had it in the first place.
No, Henry, you're raising a very important point that Britain, England, and Wales are now pretty much unique worldwide in having this legal structure. And I scratch my head over it myself, and I cannot explain it any more than to say that the interests of landowners are very well represented. They're very articulate. There's a lot of money behind them, and they've been very successful in maintaining a legal structure which ensures that they have the continued right to extract almost unlimited cash from occupiers.
Oh, okay. So I'm got a question coming in from Barry. Barry's on every call we ever had, and it's very rare he asks a question. So I'm really glad you're asking one, Barry.
Thanks, Henry. So the freeholders obviously do have an interest. There's a value attached to that. So I'm interested in, how do we make the change without too much loss of value to the freeholder? Because if there's too much loss, it just isn't going to happen because of what you said, Norma, the vested interest, the powerful vested interest. So what's the process for making the change without too much value being lost for those that do have an interest?
So I think the key thing is just separate out whose property it really is. And obviously under the law, it's the freeholders, but their own lobby group, the Residential Freehold Association, I don't know who's advising them because I wouldn't put it on their website. They basically said that they only own typically 2.5% capital value of a block of flats. So if you take it from that side of the telescope, that when you buy a flat, you're a leaseholder, you've paid a premium, sometimes hundreds of thousands of pounds, maybe even over £1 million, in certain parts of the country, to buy that leasehold interest. So if you're looking at the valuation, obviously ground rent factors into it massively. And the government now are proposing, or they've not come to a final decision, but Michael Gove, the Secretary of State, has a strong preference for peppercorn ground rent. Now, the one thing they don't say out loud is that it's not just to help people, save some money on ground rent every year. If they were to cap ground rent at a peppercorn, which is zero financial value, it would basically bring down the values of those freeholds. But my personal view, and I'm sure lots of people don't necessarily agree with it, is that if you are the party of home ownership, say you're the Conservative Party, you should come down pretty firmly on the side of the homeowners. Now, we might be legally tenants, but the fact is we've got a very strong moral claim to buying out the residual value of the freehold. And, I'm going back to 1884 when this idea of enfranchisement was being pushed by not a leftist, by Lord Randolph Churchill. And he said, nothing acted as such a powerful stimulus to socialism and popular discontent, or favoured conditions that were likely to bring about revolution, more than enormous accumulations of land in single hands, either in the country or in towns, but more especially in towns. Then he ended with this last point. Who was the more likely to be a contented and patriotic citizen? The man who was a freeholder and who was safe in his property, or the man who was at the mercy of a colossal landowner? I think that idea of enfranchisement, obviously Norma mentioned it, you couldn't be a leaseholder and have the right to vote in this country for many years. So the idea was if you enfranchised in leasehold, you would compulsorily buy the freehold. And that's a principle that's been accepted by not only Harold Wilson's government, but Margaret Thatcher basically took on a huge legal case from the Duke of Westminster on this issue. And he had said all the way up to the European Court of Human Rights, can you believe, in 1986, that it was a breach of human rights, that, you know, this was almost a Marxist thing, that he owns a property and the state has got in the way and is forcing him to sell his property against his will to a lesser person. And basically the European Court of Human Rights threw it out, and they said democratically elected governments have wide latitude to interfere with markets, including existing contracts. So I think it depends which side of the fence you are on. If you take a property rights purist view, maybe you might be supporting the freeholders that, you know, we don't do this, or there needs to be, you know, you've got to stuff the guys' mouths with gold, or you take the kind of property owning democracy view of Lord Randolph Churchill, but also Thatcher, that if we want people to believe in capitalism, we've got to give them a stake in it, and they need to be able to fully own their buildings, and freeholders only own just 2.5% capital value. So I think that's very important. Depends which side you sit.
Peter and Brian, I'm coming to you, but I'm going to have Norma's question for her point first. Yep.
Well, I'm just going to add to Harry's point, which is that the legal structure that we are operating under now, which, as you say, you know, the freeholders have value in the building. What the way the system works, freeholders' property rights are protected partly, in fact, largely through their ability to walk over the property rights of leaseholders. And the legal structure has to change to give leaseholders far more ability to protect their property rights in law than they currently have. There is, for example, in addition to the ability to extract ground rents, there are service charges, and freeholders do not need to document or to provide proof that they have spent what they're billing their occupants for. And they can go on collecting this year after year after year without offering any proof in that they have actually incurred the expenses that they are demanding that leaseholders pay every year. And so what this is effectively, it is a license for freeholders to interfere with the property rights of leaseholders. Me personally, I realize this is not a solution that many people would like to see, but I believe that this will have to end up in court, where the court will have to decide how to balance the ability of freeholders to effectively deprive leaseholders of property.
There's a fascinating article which Derek Scott by name, Scott by nature, has posted on the chat, which gives you the background to how Scotland managed to get out of this leasehold freehold binds. So thanks, Derek, for that. I'm going to come now to Peter. You got your question ready, I hope, and you come off mute. That would be great.
Right, thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you, Peter.
Right. Actually, it was almost picking up on the same point as Derek. In England, there is some sort of precedence about getting out of such things. They're in Manchester, which is the area I'm sort of based in. There was a system of rent charges, where in fact the properties were sold freehold, but the freehold contained the right to pay a chief rent to the person named in the deed, normally the property developer. Those were subject to the Rent Charges Act of 1977, which said they would expire 60 years from 1977. So the rent charges were always small and they were fixed amounts, up to £12 a year. And so that sort of gave a timeline for the rent charge. They also gave the right to actually buy out the rent charge in exactly the same way as you can buy out the freehold on properties if the landlord is prepared to offer it, that it gave you an automatic right to buy out the rent charge. So there is the sort of precedent of a legal process, but that required a primary legislation. So.
Thanks, Peter. I don't know if either of you want to comment on that before we move on to Brian's question.
No, I think the rent charges and also the Scotland case is interesting because obviously in Scotland they had far fewer kind of affected properties. I think just tens of thousands, or less than 20,000, and we're dealing with 5 million. And the problem is that Scotland, there was some really good evidence given by a Scottish academic before the Public Bill Committee on this leasehold and freehold reform bill in January. And Barry Gardiner MP said, "You did it over there, why can't we do it here?" And he said, well, we started much earlier. So in the 1970s, they passed a law in Scotland to basically try and ensure that where any new leases were being created, they'd be super long. So the reversionary interest or the value that was held by the freeholders was, or they didn't have them freeholders, but the owners of the ultimate land would be much less to compensate later on. And he was basically saying, a Scottish academic, and I'll have to get you his name, was saying that you're not dealing like with like, because England's starting at a very different starting point where you've got billions of pounds in this that's grown up in people's homes, and the fact is that you've got all sorts of lease lengths. And I think there's now, he didn't say it, but I think there's over about 2 million leasehold interests where they're coming round to nearly 80 years, where obviously the famous marriage value kicks in and you've got to pay like this payment to the freeholder to extend it, which can bring up the cost of the lease extension. So, and it's quite interesting when you look at the Law Commission's work on this in 2020, they were being asked, why can't you just abolish it in one fell swoop and do a Scotland? And they had all these justifications for why they couldn't. But then again, they are lawyers, they're not politicians, and this is a political decision to be made. But the rent charge is interesting because even though it said they're going to be abolished, over a certain period of time, obviously this leasehold and freehold reform bill is to try and deal with rent charges because the problems got worse. So it was almost like, and so Peter Bottomley made the point saying the law all made sense that it was going to try and phase it out, but we've got these rent charges on freehold houses that are, causing a menace. Obviously, as you said, it's, a few pounds, or it might be 50 or 100 pounds, not the thousands of pounds that individual leaseholders are having to pay in service charge. But I think if there's political will, there's a way. I think the problem we've had in all these years is there isn't the political will. And they hide behind people like the Law Commission, the Competition and Markets Authority, all of these, the FCA on buildings insurance, but they don't really want to be radical. And obviously Michael Gove last year said he wants to abolish leasehold. We're getting a bill that doesn't even reform it. It's tinkering really. And I think that's quite interesting, as Norma said, the power of the landowners. These are huge companies and not necessarily the great estates anymore, but they are the offshore. They are the Rothsay Lives, they are these Aviva investors. There are big companies here that are spending lots of money on public affairs consultants and the like to go against volunteers effectively like me, where we're getting into the belly of the beast and they feel threatened. So
we're going to come on to the belly of the beast in a moment, but I'm going to come on to Brian first and then we'll come back to the beast. Right, yeah, Brian.
Oh yeah, hi Henry, thank you, and excellent Norma and Harry, thank you. In a way, my question has been sort of superseded by the previous two. I was going to ask anyone who knows the answer, how have other countries who basically run a capitalist model that has historically a landowning bias that is persisted, how have those countries abroad managed to change their system in a way that makes it hard for us to replicate? And I think in a way, Harry and the others have already answered my question, but any
Norman,
further
I can see you want to come in on this. Yeah.
Yeah. They don't have the history. Like the short answer, they don't have the history. So in my own country, I'm American, and I grew up in New York City, where people had cooperative apartments, where the residents of a tower will cooperatively own the building and make decisions about upkeep and support. Or there's a condominium, which is a slightly different legal structure, but nevertheless, those who live in flats that are based in a tower block get to make the decisions and decide what money shall be spent. What is staggering to me, what I have not been able to get my mind around, is how people who not only do not own the building itself, but do not even own the premises they occupy, can be forced to pay the cost of upkeep for the building. The building needs a new roof. They're the ones who pay it. And yet, when that building is sold on to another investor, do the leaseholders get any of the proceeds? No, they do not. And it seems to me that there needs to be fundamental root and branch of the entire legal structure of ownership. What's very unusual about England and Wales is the ability to separate ownership of property from ownership of the land it sits on. And this is what I realized when we went to, many years ago, bought our house, sold our flat. And that what this does is to put enormous legal power in the hands of landowners. And fundamentally, I don't see solutions that until that legal structure is changed. And I also, like Harry, I don't think the political will is there, to be absolutely frank. The reason this is becoming an issue now is because of the rising percentage of young folk of Harry's age and my own children's age who cannot get on the housing ladder, do not want to risk drowning themselves in the legal nightmare that leasehold can become. And what you see is people who cannot get on the housing ladder, who are in their 30s and 40s, and are effectively iced out. And I'm not sure that the political powers that be in Westminster understand the extent to which housing is rising up the ladder of political urgency. That for those of us who are parents, and I'll put my hand up, I've got two 30-something children who would like to be on the housing ladder. I don't think the political powers that be understand the sense of urgency that is developing. Yes, we own our own home and we own the land it sits on, but we are concerned about our children. And what I'm finding is I get texts and emails from people in the pensions industry who are sharing the same concerns I have about housing and our children.
Harry, I know you want.
Oh, sorry. Go on.
Yeah, sorry, Brian. I'll come to you in a second.
Yeah,
Harry,
no,
I know you have
absolutely,
something to say.
One quick thing about the political will, I think sometimes markets can move politicians. And the fact is, after Grenfell, everyone's seen how hideously one-sided this leasehold system is. It is a little bit like the sub-postmasters, where people are told you sign the contract, we can basically defraud you and gaslight you while we're doing it, and the accounts are secure. Service charge accounts are not secure. And the thing is that the gap between house and flat prices now in England is at its widest in 30 years. So if that flats market keeps tanking and they talk about build, and Keir Starmer gets on his high-vis vest and they slash the planning laws, no one's going to be buying these flats. And even in Hong Kong and Singapore, where they used to buy loads of flats where I live in Isle of Dogs, London Docklands, they don't want to buy either because they've seen the situations that have gone out into Apple Daily before the communists shut them down, out in Straits Times, that when you buy a flat and you want to tenant it, your rental yield can be trashed by service charges you can't control. So I think, and also one quick thing, it is path dependency. Most of our former colonies, as soon as they got independence from the British, they abolished the leasehold system in their countries because they knew it was a scam and would deny people land, capital, and the autonomy and dignity and control that it comes with. But the key thing is we've had many opportunities to move to a fairer system called common hold. So the last day Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister, she put forward a draft bill and a consultation on common hold. And the 92 and the 97 Conservative manifestos promised common hold. It was eventually brought forward by Tony Blair in 2002, but they got nobbled by the sector. So what happened is they brought common hold forward, but instead of making it the default tenure on flats, which is what they promised in 1995, a year after I was born, with Nick Rainsford and the late Frank Dobson, called An End to Feudalism, they made it a voluntary thing. So if you're a developer, you want to make lots and lots of money, you're never going to build with common hold, because with leasehold, you sell the leases, you sell the units to the unsuspecting home buyer like my mum, and then you flog the freehold to someone in Monaco or Cayman Islands or whatever, who gets all that ancillary income. You're never going to move to common hold. So unless there's some element of compulsion on new build, we're never going to move away from leasehold. And I think Labour have said that they're going to do that. But again, they've already said that before and they didn't do it. So we've got to hold them to account.
Okay, Brian, quick comeback, and then I'm going to move on to the beast.
Yeah, I mean, basically, fundamentally agree that it's a bit like sort of climate change. Why all new builds don't aren't required to have proper insulation. It's not until next May they are. It's the same with leasehold. This is a big problem. It's a historical problem. How do you actually solve that if at the moment we're still creating new leaseholds and new rental? And it isn't just a problem for the people who own sort of the right to have to live in a space. It's also a problem for people who are renting as well, because rents are going through the roof for exactly the same reason. And if people just simply have talking shops like we do, which is really interesting, I really like it, but I don't know how you get your message across so that people stop voting for a system that that perpetuates this deep unfairness. Sorry, Henry,
Well,
I'm getting a bit
you
political there.
haven't.
Yeah.
You've got two people on this
Yeah.
call who've done more to publicise this issue than just about anybody.
No, I'm not
Add to
criticising them.
yeah.
No, please,
Yeah.
please don't. But my bad use of words. No, I fully
Yeah.
support you. What I'm saying is, how do we spread it from this talking shop to the wider world? I'm absolutely not criticising them, Henry. They're brilliant. No, please don't
Sorry.
misunderstand me.
Absolutely. Now, I'm going to pull this back because this is a pensions playpen event. And I want to pull it back very specifically. And I know Derek's put in the link about Railpen, and that's brilliant that he has. We can come back to that. But let's start by asking ourselves, why are pension schemes involved in owning freeholds in the first place? What's the point? Norma?
Well, okay. And what really got my goat, so to speak, was to see the Residential Freeholders Association insist that any effort to curb, for example, the ability to extract enormous ground rents were going to affect pensioners. Nothing could be further from the truth. If you look at the data from the Purple Book, which of course you all know, which shows you asset allocation year on year, you can see that no more than 4 to 5% of UK pension funds are invested in property. The vast majority of that is in commercial real estate, which has attributes, investment attributes that are suitable for pension funds. So it's offices, it's shopping malls, it's warehouses. It has the characteristics of capital and liquidity that are sought after by pension funds. The percentage invested in residential property is minimal. And this shows up not just in the Purple Book, which is the PPF annual publication, but it also shows up in the PLSA, the Pensions and Lifetime Savings Association annual data. They gave us their data showing how little investment is in residential property. The great myth is that somehow curbing ground rents will limit the ability of grandma and granddad to earn their pensions. Nothing could be further from the truth. As all of you know, and I know that I'm, speaking to a very, very knowledgeable group, that anyone who is the sponsor of a defined benefit pension scheme in Britain is legally on the hook to meet all pension promises in full and on time. That is what we have a pensions regulator for, created in the 2004 Pensions Act. And that is what we have a pension protection fund for, is to cover shortfalls in the event that an employer who sponsored a DB pension really genuinely cannot meet the terms. So if the ground rents, for example, are curbed, it's not grandma and granddad who are going to lose income. It's going to be it would be the employer, but so many tens of billions of pounds of defined benefit assets and liabilities have been sold to insurance companies and fund managers that it's those insurance companies and fund managers who really are on the hook to find the income that they might lose in the event that there's some effort to curb the abusive ground rent charges, which have been put in place, particularly since around 2010. It's not a pension. This is not a pension issue at all. This is an issue perhaps for maybe some insurance companies who've been aggressive buyers of ground rent income, or even perhaps aggressive buyers of freehold. But the characteristics of residential freehold are really not terribly well suited for a lot of pension savings.
Harry, do you want to add here? Because you've, of course, had quite
there's-
famously recently a bit of a spat, haven't you? Yeah.
We've been in a spat with the PLSA because I think their whole handling of this affair raised eyebrows. And I'm not just saying that as someone that's campaigning to get the law changed on leasehold. Generally, you know, people that are in the pensions industry need to ask questions of the PLSA, because we really took this whole issue seriously last year. We interviewed top actuaries like Peter Tompkins and various other authorities on this issue. But we thought, you know what? Let's speak to the horse's mouth. Let's speak to the Trade Association for Pension Funds. So we wrote very diligently to the PLSA, asking a number of questions to set out their stall. What's their organisational view, right? And it took about 2 months to get a statement back. It was signed off by the highest levels of the organisation, and they came back unequivocal. Quote: pension funds aggregate allocation to all types of property, including commercial as well as residential, accounts for 4% of all pension holdings. None of our members have expressed any concerns of us about proposed changes to rules affecting leasehold and ground rents. Now, that was in September. Now, fair enough, the government then bring forward a consultation where they propose the idea of not necessarily capping it at a sort of a monetary value, but capping it at zero financial value peppercorn. So yes, they're entitled to change their view, but what they're not entitled to do is, as what we think they have tried to do, is pull wool over the eyes of policymakers, MPs, people in the pensions industry, because you know what they did? All this, we put out a video, it got 60,000 views, which is pretty good in leasehold land, and not once they came back to retract their comment or say they've changed their position. But on the night that the government's consultation on ground rents closed, they quietly submitted at the back end of their website a submission to that consultation, which completely U-turned on their previous position in September. They didn't acknowledge their previous position in September. So they were almost suggesting to the government that this was always their position. And they portrayed this idea that locusts will descend, granny will be in penury, and basically pension funds will be wiped off the face of this earth. Now they're fair enough, they're entitled to change their view, but they're not allowed to pretend like it was always their view and that they didn't take this statement in September seriously. And what happened is that obviously MPs do their own homework. And there was a guy on the Public Bill Committee called Barry Gardner, a Labour MP, and he had obviously seen our video or seen that quote doing the rounds online, and he quoted it at the RFA, the Residential Freehold Association spokesperson, Jack Spearman, who also happens to work for Long Harbour, run by David Cameron's aristocratic half-brother-in-law, William Astor. It's a 1.6 or 1.8 billion pound ground rent fund, serious money in it. And he read it out, and Jack Spearman, almost like it was a stage thing, saying, well, you might want to go back to the PLSA. So there's an element of, it looked like it was orchestrated. Obviously, Barry Gardner had no idea that the night before they sat, that the PLSA changed its position. But you know what? The PLSA didn't tell the world it changed its position. It didn't do a press release. When the Financial Times probably reached out to them in December, they didn't give a quote. The FT did a whole piece about how pension funds would be destroyed. They quoted every freeholder and his dog. The PLSA didn't get involved. And obviously he made that quote, and then there's this being U-turn from the PLSA. They then write back to that bill committee saying that their statement in September wasn't serious. It was a little chat over on a phone call, and that the person who transcribed it, i.e. me, basically wasn't taking them seriously. But actually, I spoke to the head of media relations then, Mark Smith. He's somehow away on leave now for a period of time. I don't know what happened there. But basically, he gave me a quote, and off record, that organisation said they wouldn't normally give a quote on this issue because it's not of their members' core interests and it's tangential. And basically and I said, why are you giving a quote now then? He said they're a feeling within the organisation that there are people invoking pension funds and pensioners that are nothing to do with us. So we are going to give a statement. So the thing is, there are big question marks for the PLSA. And obviously we as campaigners, we can do what we can do, but you guys have integrity. You have that moral core to be able to raise these questions within your own sector and ask yourselves, why is the PLSA clinging to this grubby ground rent income the government's been talking about getting rid of for the last 7 years now? And these are sophisticated investors. They could have divested at a click of a button years ago. Why are they clinging on to it? And as we said earlier, it's not ESG compliant. I'm meeting pensioners every day who are being gouged by these charges, who can't sell their properties. Why isn't the PLSA talking about those pensioners? Why is it about these pensioners that somehow bought ground rents or pension funds?
Yeah.
There are no pension funds that bought freeholds. They're
Harry,
investment funds.
I'm going to let Norma take over from you.
Yeah.
It's
No,
brilliant.
I just want to reinforce the point that Harry is making. This is not an issue for pension funds. The PLSA, however, its composition has changed since the heyday. I knew them first when they were the National Association of Pension Funds, and they consisted of many schemes, the largest in the country, which were defined benefit schemes of some of Britain's biggest employers. However, their composition of membership has changed dramatically. And what you have now are big insurers in there who are writing tens of billions of pounds annually in the form of what we call bulk annuities. I know I don't need to explain that to this group, but they have taken on the liabilities for a profit of many pension schemes. And my hunch is that these have been investors, purchasers of streams of ground rent income, particularly ground rent incomes that rise every year. Why? Because from 1997, as you all know, pension funds in payment were required to move annually in line with a small measure of inflation. That the perception was that pensioners were losing out to inflation. And this became law in 1997. And so what I suspect is that some of the loudest voices objecting to any change in legislation are those with the biggest liabilities in terms of having sold profitably bulk annuities to defined benefit schemes. And what's going to happen to these schemes is if efforts are made to curb their ability to collect all this income, they're going to have to reach into their pockets or find other sources of income to make the payouts to the pensioners that they have promised. And that's really what's going on here. This is not about granny and granddad. It's some very deep pocketed, very well funded fund management companies, insurance companies who want to make sure that they can continue to reap the benefit of law, which effectively allows property owners to walk roughshod over the interests of leaseholders.
Thank you, Norma. I have been in presentation after presentation where I have been told that by investing in ground rents, my pension scheme can get gilts plus returns on an index-linked basis. And that has always been backed up by a statement that the freeholder has got almost unlimited powers to take what they want from leaseholders by way of ground rents.
Need I say more?
Yeah.
Need I say more, Harry?
Very quickly,
yeah.
This is really important. The former housing minister, Rachel McLean, who was responsible with Michael Gove in bringing forward these leasehold reforms, she was quoted in the Times newspaper on Friday, and it's really important when we talk about ESG. She says that she receives hundreds of letters a day from leaseholders who face bankruptcy or losing their home if they could not pay rising charges. She says this is human misery on a massive scale. You think, how on earth have we got to this position? And that's when I formed the view that this was a completely unethical system and that it was wrong. It's not free market capitalism at all. It's not a fair system where people have an equal right to participate in, and I find it disgusting. The key thing for us on this call is she said McLean particularly interrogated the pensions argument and sought analysis from the Treasury and the Department for Work and Pensions, as well as her own department. The freeholders came with a glossy brochure, and I gave that to my officials and said, can you please tell me if this is true? She says, and they came back and said, Minister, there is no evidence for any of this. So we've got to ask ourselves, why is the PLSA pushing this line? Who has lobbied them? Is it maybe one or two of their members? Is it a Rothschild Life or Aviva Investors? But they're not pension funds. They're fund managers or insurers. They're not pension funds. Who has got them to change their position? Because it was right as rain in September. They said not one of their members was interested. And remember, the government have been talking about lease reform for 7 years. So the PLSA was asleep at the wheel last September. They didn't know what their members really thought and were anxious about, that this was a core issue for them, or it wasn't an issue and someone's had a little word with them to make them change their mind in the intervening period. Something's happened. And PLSA need to be fully accountable behind the data that is basically pushing their statements, because that submission to the government, it was empty phrasing, as Norma has said publicly already, and there was no PLSA data to back up their argument. What proportion of their membership is impacted by ground rents? And of those, what proportion of their total investments is in ground rents? Is it that they're just sniffing for compo? Or is it that they have bet the house on ground rents? That's a huge issue. And I think for your sector, you need to be asking these questions. Why has the PLSA come to this position?
It's a hugely, can I just add, it's a hugely risky investment. The CMA have been signaling since 2017 that it believes that ground rent incomes are politically challengeable. And these firms that went in and bought up ground rent income did so with the knowledge that they were buying into something which had potential political risk. Why they proceeded with that decision, that investment decision, I do not understand. But there you go. This notion that somehow Granny and Granddad are harmed by any effort to rein in what is effectively an abuse of the property rights of leaseholders is completely, has no basis for reality whatsoever. This isn't, this is a pensions workshop here, but this is not a pensions issue. I'd be curious to know, Henry, who are offering you these briefings? What kinds of firms are telling you that ground rents are a great thing for you to invest in? Who are they?
Consultants, basically. Consultants who are organising sort of teach-ins to trustees on alternative forms of financing of a pension scheme to gilts.
Are they consultants that are the big firms that I would have covered?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to call them out. I'm not going to call them out on here, but I will share information of those seminars I've been to with you, Norma. I'll also share with you an article which is on my blog from The Guardian, which explains that Rothsay not only do they own freeholds, but they actually lend money to freeholders so they can buy more. And of course, this is a good way for an insurance company to get round the problems that they have with regard to the investment, because they have various rules governing their capital adequacy. By lending money into landlords, they're able to get exposure to this in a wonderful and delicious way.
I have no problem with insurers who try to earn higher rates of return on investment. I understand that. However, the question is the balance of rights, the balance of property rights, and the balance of property rights of freeholders and landowners versus the balance of property rights of occupiers. And my personal view, based on nothing, is I think this will eventually have to end up in court, and the courts will have to decide whether freeholders should continue to be able to ride roughshod over the property rights of leaseholders, or whether the law needs to put its foot down and stop it.
Well, I'm going to just ask the audience, as Jeremy would say, have we got any further questions at this point? Stick your hand up if you have. Okay, well, I'm going to just move on to my final question is, what do you want the people on this call to do? We've touched upon this before, but I'll start with Harry and then I'll move to Norma on that. Harry, what should we be doing in the light of everything we've heard today, and indeed in the light of the rather pathetic debate that's going on in Parliament about this?
I think it is asking the PLSA, because they're almost like the icon of the industry in a way. That why have they changed position, and what is behind it? Have you got data? Who in the membership has raised this as an issue? Because there's just this opaqueness which isn't good for public policy and good discourse, I think, at all. So I think that, and also when you do see these things about ground rent, sometimes in life, my mum always says, when something's too good to be true, it usually is. And the idea of ground rent is nothing more symbolic of that phrase than ground rent, because you're just extracting wealth from another party, not providing any service or value. Like under the law, you don't have to provide a service. It's not like service charges. So I think if you ever see those things, to push back slightly and say, this is really not a good deal. And, you know, you shouldn't be recommending this because, you know, the writing is on the wall now. It's obviously not one for the Conservatives. And I think the big question mark is, will Labour really see this through? Because we've had false dawns before from them. So I think that's the thing. But ask the PLSA, because they're trying to steer campaigners that are doing the right thing, and people that took a lot of it time and effort to get their position right in September in the name of pensions. So I think you should be holding their feet to the fire, because they seem a little bit unaccountable on this issue.
Harry, refer you to Derek's comments in chat, and in particular to the timing of Railpen's withdrawal from ownership of freeholds, which was significant and significantly predated the statement from the PLSA. I think what we've got to accept is that Railpen, who are a very major pension scheme and whose CEO is a senior exec or senior functionary in the PLSA organisation, John Tillman, have been very vocal on this, and I think this may well be the crux of the matter, that the pension schemes do see the ESG argument and should be withdrawing from this. And if that means that freeholders no longer have the weight of pension money behind them, that will be difficult for them, because they will then see that they are no longer the only owners, if you like, of the rights which they currently possess. Those ownership rights must be shared with leaseholders who must have some way of pushing back. I am sitting in a flat at the moment in central London, and we have seen our freeholders demand a 150% increase in our ground rents for no reason whatsoever. We've asked them who they are. They won't tell us. We told us asked them for their reasoning. They won't tell us. They hide behind their property agents, Knight Frank Rutley, who say that they can't disclose anything, and so we are powerless. Absolutely crazy situation. We are fortunately not taking this on the chin, and we are sharing with all parties everything. So they will also get a copy of this video, which I'm very happy to say will be an extremely interesting video, not just for them, but I hope to the PLSA, who will also be getting a copy. But we are nearing the very end of our broadcast. Yeah, and I would like to say thank you to Harry and to Norma, both of whom have appeared without any vested interest in this, other than that they have done a tremendous amount of work, and we'd like to thank them very much for appearing on this and for the wider work they're doing. So before I wrap up, a big round of applause from the Pension Playpen for you guys. Cheers. Okay. Do you guys want to say anything in conclusion before I wrap things up?
All I would say is that I have covered the pensions industry on and off since 1991. And I have enormous respect for many of the professionals who operate in that industry, both on the investment side and on the actuarial evaluation side. And all I would say is I would urge you as professional people, very knowledgeable people, to use what muscles you have to try to see that there's greater fairness in property ownership. I realize it's not your main thrust, but because of who you are and because of your knowledge, experience, and ability, I would like to urge you to put your shoulders behind the wheel as well, to join all the 5 million leaseholders who are hoping for change.
Thank you, Norma. And I think we can now turn off the recording, Steve, if we can, and wrap things up. Thank you very much indeed again.
Thank you very much, Norma. Thank you, Harry. Thank you, Henry. Thanks for everybody's input and questions today. Really enjoyable session. As usual, we pray for peace in the East and the Middle East, and cannot believe it's now March 2024 and it's still ongoing, but there we go. So enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for joining, and really appreciate everybody's input. And next week, Henry and I will hopefully be looking at value for money and where the scheme should be sharpening their pencil on reporting and governance. So hopefully you can join us on that one. And please have a great day and a great week. So thanks all for joining. And the video will be up later this afternoon.
Later this afternoon. Brilliant. Okay,
Yeah.
thanks very much.
Thank you
Log
very
up
much.
tomorrow
We'll
morning.
promote that.
Cheers.
Yeah,
Thanks a lot.
thank you, Harry.
Right. Cheers,
Promote
Harry.
it any way you
Thanks for
can.
having us. Really good chat.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye.